Breaking tonight in a Kelly File exclusive, a top congressman on the Homeland Security Committee saying that 4 known terrorists from the Middle East were allegedly caught sneaking across our southern border into the United States 1 day before 9/11. We will have that exclusive for you in 1 moment. But first, also breaking tonight, after weeks of pledging no troops on the ground in the fight against the world's most dangerous terror group, there are clear signs the Obama administration is reversing course, contrary to its denials that it is. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Kelly File. I'm Megyn Kelly. The president's oft-repeated promise started to unravel yesterday when the Joint Chiefs head, General Martin Dempsey, the highest-ranking military official in this country, floated the idea that U.S. boots on the ground might possibly be a very real possibility.
If we reach the point where I believe our advisors should accompany Iraq troops on attacks against specific ISIL targets, I'll recommend that to the president.
That suggestion went a couple steps further today. First, former Obama Defense Secretary Robert Gates, he also worked for Bush, said this morning, that the fight against ISIS will require U.S. boots on the battlefield if we hope to have any chance of actually succeeding.
The reality is they're not going to be able to be successful against ISIS strictly from the air or strictly depending on the Iraqi forces or the Peshmerga or the Sunni tribes acting on their own. So there will be boots on the ground if there's to be any hope of success in the strategy. And I think that by continuing to repeat that, the president, in effect, traps himself.
Then the Army Chief of Staff, Ray Odierno, the man largely credited with beating back the terrorists in 2007, told the New York Times that, quote, airstrikes will not be the end-all and be-all solution in Iraq, adding, quote, you've got to have ground forces that are capable of going in and routing out the terrorists. And he says the Iraqis are not that capable force. Then President Obama spoke at Central Command headquarters around lunchtime today. And listen to how he is phrasing the issue now.
The American forces that have been deployed to Iraq do not and will not have a combat mission. They will support Iraqi forces on the ground as they fight for their own country against these terrorists. As your commander-in-chief, I will not commit you and the rest of our armed forces to fighting another ground war in Iraq.
See what he said there? They will support Iraqi troops without fighting. Then the president's press secretary moved the ball even further just a couple of hours ago.
What they would do in that role is that they would be offering some advice, some tactical advice to Iraq security forces who are taking the fight to ISIL on the ground. You can imagine a scenario where those American military personnel would be calling in airstrikes in support of Iraqi security force, in support of missions that are being conducted by Iraqi security forces. But those American ground troops, if they're forward deployed, would not be in a position where they are personally or directly engaging the enemy in combat.
What? Ollie North is here in a minute, but we begin tonight with our chief White House correspondent, Ed Henry, who is live in Washington. Ed?
Good evening, Megyn. Note the president's insistence as well that it will not be a combat mission. That leaves open the possibility, though, that the troops will see combat. It's technically not a combat mission, but they will be serving side by side, as Josh Earnest suggested, with Iraqi troops who are in combat with ISIS fighters. And when Josh Earnest was talking about lining up those airstrikes, having troops on the ground who are helping those laser-pointed bombs, they're in the middle of a combat situation. And if they're fired upon, what are U.S. troops to do? The second important point to pay close attention to is the fact that the president today doubled down on saying, look, we can count on the Iraqis to be the ground troops. What he was ignoring was that yesterday Martin Dempsey, in his testimony, didn't get as much attention as the other headlines, but said that he believes only about half, he estimated, of the Iraqi troops are ready to be partners with the U.S. troops. General Odierno went further today, saying that it's not that the Iraqi troops lost to the ISIS fighters months ago that put us in this position. He said the Iraqi forces just didn't fight. They gave up. They surrendered. That doesn't sound like they're ready to fight, Megyn.
Ed, thank you. The president says if those troops are sent to the front lines, they will not be in a combat role. But will they really have a choice if they find themselves under fire? And if they do, God forbid, could they even pick up a weapon under this plan to defend themselves? Colonel Oliver North is host of War Stories here on Fox News and author of the book Counterfeit Lies. Ollie, good to see you. All right, so the president says no boots on the ground, no boots, no boots. Dempsey comes out and says maybe. Gates comes out and says yeah. Odierno says yeah, we're going to need them. President Obama again, well, not a combat mission. They won't be forward deployed. And by the way, the Iraqis are going to do it, and they have to do it, and they will do it. But Odierno just told us they can't do it.
They can't. And the sad fact of it is that the Iraqis have about the $12 billion worth of equipment that we've delivered in the last 3 years, 2/3 to 3/4 of it has either been captured by ISIS, is broken, or unserviceable. And on top of that, the volunteers that showed up after Mosul fell to ISIS, driven there essentially by al-Sistani, the leading cleric of the Shiite faith over in Iraq, he called for volunteers. 15,000 plus showed up. They carried their AK-47 that was rusty, a half magazine, and they showed up in their sandals. No food, no equipment, and essentially they got sent home. What you have is the only force capable of fighting right now inside the borders of what we used to call Iraq are the Kurds. And the Kurds aren't even getting support directly from the United States. They're getting it from France and Albania.
So what are we going to do? What does it mean that we are going to be with them, but not forward deployed?
Well, look, in my military mind, what you have is Operation Enduring Confusion. What you have is a president who cannot make up his mind what he wants. The coalition that John Kerry spoke so eloquently of this afternoon in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee is non-existent. The idea of Arab air power aiding and abetting our mission over there, Arab air power is an oxymoron. They can't do this. We can do it, but we would have to put American forward air controllers and joint tactical air controllers on the ground at the battalion level with the Iraqi army and with the Kurds. The Kurds are not going to go fight to take Damascus. And so the end result, nor the Iraqis, they couldn't. And so the end result is you have a balloon that you're squeezing at one end, perhaps in Iraq, pinpoint accuracy with airstrikes that we're really good at, and yet no ability to go after ISIS in their safe haven that Barack Obama says they shouldn't have.
Why isn't he listening to the generals? We've got General Odierno saying you cannot do it with airstrikes alone. You need capable ground troops. And, Mr. President, that doesn't include the Iraqis right now. And you've got Bob Gates saying you need troops on the ground. Dempsey signaled we need troops on the ground possibly. He doesn't seem to be listening.
Megan, I've spent my whole life in and around the U.S. military and been on plenty of times with you from Iraq and other places. I've spent my life with these young guys. I'm waiting for the general or admiral who will stand up on his hind feet and say, this is mission impossible. Given the constraints that you've given, we cannot accomplish the objective you've set. It is impossible to do. They're talking now about taking 5,000 of the so-called Free Syrian Army, somehow exporting them from Syria, getting them to Saudi Arabia and training them, and sending them back in 8 to 12 months. By then, ISIS will number 45 or 50,000. 5,000 troops to fight a two-front war against Assad and against ISIS. It's not something that can be done. Somebody has to tell the truth. Some general or admiral at the Pentagon or somewhere else in Central Command has got to stand up and say, the mission we've been given we can do, but we can't with the constraints you've placed upon us. And the tragedy of it is that the disaster that befalls us is the first story you started with tonight, with more and more of them coming in from their safe haven into this country to threaten Americans right here in the homeland.
Oh, good gracious. Colonel North, good to see you.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you so much, sir. We're going to have that story for you in moments. As a chorus of military voices grows now, questioning the president's plan for combating ISIS, a new poll from CBS and the New York Times is also getting a lot of attention, as it shows some 57% of respondents saying President Obama is not being tough enough on these terrorists. Chris Steyerwaltz is our Fox News digital politics editor. This was taken after the big speech last week, and so what does it tell us?
The speech didn't work. and it probably is an indication. Remember, the White House has a lot more polling data than we do at the media polling that we do at Fox and that other outlets do. They got a lot of polling data, so they knew it didn't work. And I have no doubt that if it was political pressure that brought the president into the fight in the first place, it will be political pressure that will affect how he decides to carry it out.
When you've got all those generals, as we just went through, saying we're going to need troops, we're going to need American troops on the ground to get this done, and I'm asking Colonel North, why isn't he doing that? And I ask you, Chris Darwell, take a look at this poll. Out again, CBS News, New York Times. Do you favor or oppose the U.S. sending ground troops in to fight ISIS? And look at the numbers. 55% of the American public opposes troops on the ground. Is that the reason the president doesn't appear to be following his general's advice?
Well, it would appear to be the reason he is double talking about it, and it would appear to be the reason that he will not level with the people of the United States on this, that the boots aren't on the ground. Well, the boots are on the ground, but they're not boots. Well, they're not forward deployed. They're not in combat. They won't shoot back. They'll just stand next to the guy who's killing the guy, but they won't kill him himself. And it is such a muddle. It is such an endlessly confusing muddle. It is no wonder that when the New York Times editorial page today says they don't trust him to fulfill his promise about troops on the ground, that he was able to prove them right even within the day. Even within the same day, he was able to satisfy their fear that he would betray his promise. And that's the situation for this president is. He has made a lot of lavish promises. He does not have a good track record of delivering.
It's incredible because others are looking at what the generals are saying, why aren't you listening to them, Mr. President? You got the New York Times saying, you are getting ready to listen to them, and you better not, because you made this promise over and over, and the ball is in the president's court, and there are a lot of lives at stake as he considers it. Chris, thank you.
You bet.
We also have breaking news tonight on reports of terrorists trying to cross our southern border. Listen.
My concern is that I have a reason to believe that on September 10th there were actually 4 individuals trying to cross through the Texas border who were apprehended at 2 different stations that do have ties to known terrorist organizations in the Middle East. Are you not aware of that?
Wait until you see the dodge that happened after that. Our exclusive interview with Congressman Jason Chaffetz, the man who asked that question, and we'll show you the answer moments away. Plus, a frightening new warning from the director of the FBI as we learn more about a New York man accused of recruiting Americans to the cause of jihad.
It's no longer necessary to actually meet somebody in al-Qaeda to get training and inspiration to conduct a terrorist attack here in the United States. Someone can do it in their pajamas in their basement.